get the roll called and get right into our business meeting. So call to order the Wednesday, September 15th, 2021 meeting of the Sacramento Transportation Authority and the Sacramento Abandoned Vehicle Service Authority. I want to welcome all who've joined with us today, those in chambers and as well as those via Zoom. And with that, I'll turn to our clerk and ask Darrell to please call the roll and make any announcements need to be made, and we'll get started.
Desmond, Frost, Guetta
here.
Harris,
Here.
Kozlowski, Kennedy,
Here.
Miller, Natoli,
Here.
Zandu,
Here.
Chenier,
Here.
Avdis,
Here.
Singh Allen,
Here.
Speece,
Present.
Terry,
Here.
Valenzuela,
Here.
and Vang.
Here.
And you have a quorum.
Very good.
And on to the announcements. Would you like to do the pledge, or would you
Yes,
want to
we'll do the pledge. And if you'd lead us in the pledge, Darrell, please.
Okay, thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you
Okay.
very much.
No problem. And on to the announcements. In compliance with directives of the County, State, and Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, this meeting is live streamed and closed to in-person public participation. Temporary procedures are subject to change pursuant to guidelines related to social distancing and minimizing person-to-person contact. To make a verbal comment at today's meeting, dial 916-875-2500 and follow the prompts to be placed in queue for a specific agenda item or off-agenda matter. When the chair opens public comment for a specific agenda item or off-agenda matter, callers will be transferred from the queue into the meeting to make a verbal comment. Written comments are always accepted. Send your email comment to boardclerk@saccounty.net, and your comment will be routed to the board and filed in the record. This meeting of the Sacramento Transportation Authority is cablecast live on Metro Cable 14, the local government affairs channel on the Comcast Consolidated Communications and AT&T U-verse cable systems. This meeting is closed captioned and live streamed at metro14live.saccounty.net. Today's meeting will replay Sunday, September 19th at 9 a.m. on Channel 14. This meeting can also be viewed at youtube.com/Metro Cable 14. And that concludes my announcements.
Okay, thanks for all those announcements. And again, welcome certainly to board members, staff, and to members of the public, and those that will be presenting today as well. And with that then, unless there's anything further from board members, let's go right into our agenda. And first is to receive any comments from the public regarding matters that are not on the agenda. Do we have any speakers, Madam Clerk?
I do not see any comments for item number 1 in the phone queue.
Okay.
And there are no hand raises for
Okay.
members.
All right, then we'll keep moving right down. Takes us next then to Executive Director's Report. Serena.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon and happy September. In light of our full agenda, I will keep my report brief. And what I'm hoping is the last time to be mentioning this, we are still actively searching for a new voting committee member in the Independent Taxpayer Oversight Committee, or ITOC. We've had some interest, but as of yet, no applicants. So if you know any good candidates, please direct them to the STA or ITOC websites for further application information. In regards to state funding, the California Transportation Commission has officially kicked off Cycle 3 of the Senate Bill 1, SB 1, competitive funding rounds for 3 of their programs: the Local Partnership Program, Solutions for Congested Corridors, and the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. The STA serves as the nominating agency for the Local Partnership Program. We do not have specifics yet, but performance metrics appear to be playing a larger role in this cycle, including cap tie and equity requirements. The CTC has workshops later this fall to outline these metrics, and we will bring a full report once we fully understand. Once the workshops are complete, staff will meet with the PAG to develop a priorities list and present to the board at a later date. The call for projects is anticipated for summer of '22, with program adoption in summer of 2023. I know that the presentation later will display the survey results for our abandoned vehicle program, but I wanted to give a brief update on the direction our partner agencies have chosen in regards to pursuing a measure to reauthorize the program. We have received written confirmation from the cities of Elk Grove, Folsom, and Sacramento in favor of a new measure. Staff has received verbal agreement from the county and from Rancho Cordova, but have not received anything in writing to date. Previously, the City of Citrus Heights has chosen not to participate. However, with the lower ballot cost estimates, we have reached out to see if they've changed their position. The only member agency we've not yet heard from is the City of Galt. We will provide any updates at the next board meeting, as well as a timeline for putting the initiative on the ballot. And Chair, this serves as my conclusion of my report.
Okay, thanks, Sabrina. Board members, questions or comments regarding Executive Director's report or any other items you wanted to inquire about at this juncture in the meeting?
I do not see any hand raises in the queue, and I also do not have any public comment for item number 2.
Okay, all right. If you think of something along the way, we can certainly, Sabrina's going to be with us the whole afternoon, so we can ask her then. So, okay, very good. Okay, with that then we'll go to our consent items, items 3, 4, and 5. Is there any board member want to speak to any of those items or pull anything off the agenda?
I'll move the item. This is Chenier.
Okay.
Second, Terry.
Okay, moved by Chenier, seconded by Terry to move the entire consent calendar. Any questions? If not, we'll go to public comment. Any public comments?
I do not have any public comment at this time for items 3, 4, or 5, and I don't see any hand raises in the queue for the members.
Okay, anything staff needs to touch base on? Everything's all included. Okay, I see Tim's here with us. Okay. All right. If there's nothing further, then we'll call for the vote. Then voice vote. Please call the roll.
Desmond? Frost?
Aye.
Guetta?
Get aye.
Harris?
Aye.
Kozlowski?
Yes.
Kennedy?
Aye.
Miller? Natoli?
Aye.
Sandhu?
Aye.
Chenier?
Aye.
Abdus?
Aye.
Singh Allen?
Aye.
Speece?
Aye.
Terry?
Aye.
Valenzuela?
Yes.
And Vang.
Yes.
And your motion carries with members Desmond and Miller being absent.
Okay, very good. All right. Thank you, board members. And with that, then, we have several separate matters. And I know one that we'll have some introductory comments by our executive director. And again, I think it might be helpful if we can allow for presentations, but certainly if there are questions along the way, feel free to interject. But if we can maybe allow for the presentation, at least a summary, and then take questions and certainly allow for board member comments and any other inquiries about what's going to be presented to us here in just a moment. So with that, I'm going to turn to Ms. Drago again. Sabrina.
Thank you, Chair. So in mid-2020, the STA board decided to table a ballot initiative for the November 2020 ballot to do another half-cent sales tax measure due to the pandemic. However, with traffic levels increasing in the spring, the board opted to move out with a survey to see how the public felt during that time. So through the procurement process, the STA board has procured FM3 consultants to do a public survey, and in August they did a 3-day qual board as well as a phone survey for 932 voters. Dave Metz is the president and partner of FM3 and served as the project manager for this, and he is here today to present his findings to the board.
Okay, good. Thanks, Sabrina. Any questions of Sabrina regarding the background? If not, then we're going to go right into Mr. Metz's presentation. Any hands up, Darrell?
I do not see any hand raises at this time from any other members. And Metro Cable, can you please put the presentation up? We actually had it marked for 5, but it's for number 6. Thank you very much.
Very good. Okay, so we do have that on our screens. Everybody's got that, I trust. And with that, I'll turn to Mr. Dave Metz from FM3 Research. Dave, you want to go ahead and start with your introduction and presentation.
All right. Great. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. I'm pleased to share the results of our opinion research conducted over the course of this summer to assess public support for a potential transportation sales tax in Sacramento County. The current research builds upon several prior surveys that we have conducted in the county and will highlight some of the places where public opinion has either remained stable or shifted over time. Before going into the details, I'll simply say that overall, the polling shows that there is concern about the degree to which the county's transportation infrastructure is not adequate to meet what voters see as its future needs, both in terms of roads and public transportation. And there is broad support for increasing taxes to provide additional revenue to meet those needs. However, at this time in the survey, the level of support falls short of the 2/3 supermajority that will be required for a measure placed on the ballot as a special tax by the Transportation Authority. We've tested a range of different projects and pro and con messages to try to understand how fluid support might be. And while there is a solid majority that is in favor, it does fall short of that 2/3 supermajority. I'll walk through some of the key findings of the survey that lead us to that conclusion, and then obviously be happy to answer any questions that you all have. I'll go ahead and start walking through the slides. I actually can't see the slide deck. Oh, there it is. Okay, fantastic. So I'll just sort of give you a verbal cue to move on to the next slide and walk through some of the key findings, starting with the methodology of the survey. Most of what I'll be sharing with you today is the quantitative research on the next slide that we conducted in the middle of the month of August. We talked to just over 900 voters countywide who, based on their past voting behavior, considered likely to cast ballots in next November's election. These were a mix of both telephone and online interviews conducted on landline phones, wireless phones, and online, with invitations through text messages and emailed invitations. Our overall margin of error, as you'll see here, is just over 3%. There's a number of places in the data where I'll highlight some differences between subgroups of the Sacramento County electorate, and in those cases, the margin of error is a little bit higher. In addition, before we conducted the survey, we did some qualitative research in the form of an online qual board. This is sort of the equivalent of in-person focus groups, which are typically how we do qualitative research prior to the pandemic. Obviously, during the pandemic, bringing strangers together for an indoor conversation over a couple of hours is not safe, and therefore we switched to an online format in which respondents could log in over a 3-day period twice a day and answer a series of questions about transportation in Sacramento County in a more open-ended format that allowed us to hear some of the things that are on their minds and to obtain their reactions to some of the potential projects and pro and con messages that might be offered if a measure were placed on the ballot. Based on what we heard in those qualitative exercises, we sort of sharpened and refined the survey questions, and that leads to the overall presentation that I'm sharing today. At various points, I will highlight some quotations from the qual board participants that I think provide some sense of the thinking in voters' minds that lie behind some of the survey numbers. So with that said, let's go ahead and look at some of the broad contextual questions that we started the survey with. If you'll move ahead 2 slides. We asked respondents to tell us whether they think things in Sacramento County are headed in the right direction or off on the wrong track. This is kind of a standard introductory question that we ask in most surveys of this type, just to get a sense of the overall public mood. And in Sacramento County, as in most parts of the state, certainly most large urban areas, that mood is definitely at best mixed at this point. We have 43% of respondents who say they think things are on the wrong track, 33% who think that they're headed in the right direction. So it's a plurality that are expressing some concerns, and that reflects a more negative trend relative to polling that was done prior to the pandemic. Same trends have been evident statewide as well. Continuing concerns about COVID, about wildfires, about the state's economic recovery, I think, are driving some of those sentiments. And that has also played into some perceptions of local government, as you'll see on the next slide, when we asked respondents to indicate how they felt about a variety of different public entities that are involved in transportation in Sacramento County. You'll see their overall responses here, comparing back to a survey that we conducted in 2019. And in general, the numbers are not drastically different. There has been some increase in negative sentiment toward the Board of Supervisors, for example, but attitudes toward the STA itself have actually become modestly more positive over the last couple of years, with 34% having a favorable view, 21% reporting having an unfavorable view. Now we can break out these responses, as you'll see on the next slide, by different geographic subgroups within the county. We'll take a look at this in a number of different data points in the survey. And as you'll see here, when we're looking at transportation agencies, while there are some shifts as we look at one supervisorial district or another, those shifts overall are not dramatic. And the general trends in public opinion are pretty consistent. Now, to understand some of the factors that might be driving voters concerned about the direction of the county, we included a question, as you'll see on the next slide, where we asked respondents to rate the seriousness of a variety of issues facing Sacramento County. We had them rate each as either an extremely, very, somewhat, or not too serious a problem. And we totaled the proportions who rated each either an extremely or very serious problem, representing the top 2 points on that scale on the right-hand side. And that's how we've ranked the issues here. As you'll see, the top tier of concerns that residents have largely don't have to do with transportation. Homelessness is the dominant concern, with 92% rating it a very serious problem and 66%, really a remarkable number, rating it an extremely serious problem. Obviously, it's not just Sacramento County, but every major city in the state that's experiencing that right now. Following that, we have some issues around the economy and the cost of living that I think are prominent concerns. The economic impact of the coronavirus, the cost of housing, and the issue of government waste and emission management are all things that at least 2/3 of voters are rating as a very serious problem right now. But then we'll see in that middle tier some transportation concerns. Potholes and deteriorating local streets and roads are the most prominent one that the voters rate, 64% labeling it a very serious problem. Traffic congestion on local freeways and highways at 56% is rated as a concern by a majority of those polled. And if you move to the next slide, as we move down the list, you'll see a range of other transportation concerns that are somewhat less broadly shared. Condition of local streets and roadways, sort of equivalent to the numbers we tested earlier about potholes. Majority rate that a very serious problem. But as you move down the slide, issues relating to the availability of bus service, light rail service, bicycle and pedestrian routes tend to be mentioned by fewer voters as being very serious problems. That roughly corresponds with the proportion of the electorate that tend to use those modes of transportation regularly. Most county residents, as we'll see in a moment, drive as their primary means of getting around. A couple of encouraging figures that you'll see here overall, although there is high cost about the cost of living, concern about jobs and unemployment is lower than what we have seen it be during the course of the last year or so during the pandemic. Only 1 in 5 voters rate that as an extremely serious problem. And concern about taxes is also notably low. Only 37% say the amount they pay in local taxes is an extremely or very serious problem. Now, just to give you a sense of sort of the way voters articulate some of these concerns on the next slide, you'll see some examples of quotations from Qual Board participants. When we ask them to name sort of what concerns them most about transportation in Sacramento County, these are some of the kinds of things that people mention. Sometimes in these exercises, when we ask people to elaborate on what concerns them, they don't have a lot of very detailed responses to offer. That was not the case in these Qual Boards. Everybody had some part of the transportation system that they were irritated by or that they felt was in need of improvement. And you'll see a range of the different kinds of specific things that people mentioned here. Now, this question that we just looked at about level of concern with issues facing Sacramento County is one that we had asked in our prior polling back in 2019. And on the next slide, you'll see a slide that shows you the degree to which concern about some of these issues has shifted relative to where they were in 2019. And I think a lot of these differences are not very surprising given the sort of change in the issue environment since then. Significantly higher concerns about jobs and unemployment, the cost of housing, homelessness, and the quality of our air, likely reflecting the impact of wildfires. Down toward the bottom of the slide, though, you'll see some declining concerns about traffic congestion, both on local streets and roads and on local freeways and highways. And I believe what the objective data about traffic has shown is that the rates of traffic, the number of cars on the road, have come back to something close to pre-pandemic levels, but they're more dispersed over the course of the day. Rush hour isn't quite as dense as it used to be. And so it may be that even though there are as many people driving today as there were pre-pandemic, they're not as sort of compacted into the same amount of times. So the experience of some drivers may be that traffic isn't as bad as what they remember before. That obviously sort of plays into how urgent they may feel some improvements to transportation are. Now, on the next slide, as I mentioned a moment ago, we asked our respondents to tell us how often they relied on various means of transportation to get around in Sacramento County. 86% said that driving alone was the way that they expected to be getting around when the pandemic is over, using it at least 2 to 3 times a week. We have roughly 1/3 that say that they will use a bicycle, carpool, or use a ride-hail service. And then about 1 in 5 that tell us they will ride light rail or the bus at least a few times a week. And obviously there's many local voters who are using more than one of these modes of transportation in the course of a typical week. Relative to where we were pre-pandemic, these numbers don't reflect a very dramatic change, as you'll see on the next slide. When we compare the modes of transportation people said they were using pre-pandemic in 2019 to those they expect to use when the pandemic is over in this year's survey, the only changes that are outside the survey's margin of error are increases in the proportion who say they will ride a bicycle and the proportion who say they will carpool, each up 7 points and 5 points respectively. Other than that, the usage of each mode is basically identical to where it was in 2019, again with driving alone being the primary way of getting around. As you'll see on the next slide, in the qual board exercise, we tried to sort of ask people how they were thinking about transportation and how they might adjust their plans once the pandemic is over. And as you'll see here, there's a variety of different responses that the participants offered, but the general trend in the responses was to say, I don't anticipate that it's going to change a lot. There are things that might change it. If there are improvements to public transportation, but overall, there are people saying that they think just the car culture that people say exists in California, the demands of their job to get from one location to another that may not be served by mechanisms other than driving, all of those things lead them to say that they're not planning on making major changes in the way that they get around. So all of that provides some context for our exploration of a potential ballot measure. As we move to the next slide, you'll see the way that we framed the issue for voters. Starting on the next slide, we offered the respondents a summary of potential ballot language for a transportation sales tax measure. The best practice when you're testing support for a potential ballot measure is to give voters a model of the wording as it might appear on the ballot, to ask that question very early in the survey. So you're replicating the experience that voters have when they look at their ballot for the first time. They may not have read the voter pamphlet, read the newspaper, or seen advertising from yes or no campaigns, but they'll all see the wording of that question on the ballot. So that's the most critical factor in how voters cast their votes. So we gave people a summary description of the kinds of objectives that the measure would have in terms of improving transportation. Noted that it would be a half-cent sales tax. For half our sample, we tested one that's open-ended until ended by voters. And for the other half of our sample, we tested one with a 30-year time limit. And then listed some of the fiscal accountability provisions that might be put in place. The wording of the ballot question was largely shaped by what we had seen in prior opinion research in the county, were things that voters were enthusiastic about. And I think the findings of this survey, as you'll see, largely reinforce that those seem to be the things that are most heavily on voters' minds. So given that language, when we asked voters how they thought they would vote, as you'll see on the next slide, we had a total of 54% of voters who said they would vote yes, 42% of voters who said that they would vote no. That's reflected in that bar on the bottom of the slide. The two bars above it show the results when we separate the two half samples that heard about the different potential endpoints until ended by voters or after 30 years. And there was no statistically meaningful difference between those two. They basically tested identically, which is often the case. Voters don't necessarily fixate on that length unless their attention is really called to it. Now, when we compare these results to results that we obtained in polling in 2019 on the next slide, using similar but not identical ballot language, overall they're fairly similar. 58% in 2019 said they would vote yes, 54% say they would now. The main difference is the definite no vote is higher at this point than it was 2 years ago. 32% saying they would definitely vote against it versus 25% in 2019. And obviously, if you're trying to win 2/3 supermajority support, if you have almost 1/3 of voters dug in opposition right from the beginning, it's really hard to get to that 2/3. You've basically got no margin for error. The shift here in the yes vote is really right around the survey's margin of error. The increase in the definite no vote is outside it. And I think that reflects just some of the trends we saw in the earlier numbers. The wrong track numbers up, a little bit more negative attitudes toward local government, concerns about the cost of living, all things that I think potentially are some headwinds that a ballot measure might be running into. The next few slides highlight some of the demographic differences in patterns of support for the measure as we described it. Here we're combining both versions of the ballot language, the one that was open-ended and the one with the 30-year time limit. And as one would expect, there are big partisan differences. More than 7 in 10 Democrats supportive, only about a little more than 1/4 of Republicans in favor, independents about evenly split. And similar dynamics when we look at voters who self-identify as liberal, moderate, or conservative. On the following slide, we break the results out by age. Significantly broader and stronger support among the youngest voters. Those under age 30 supported by a 73-20 margin, those in their 30s supported by a 65-31 margin. So we're basically at 2/3 support among voters under age 40. Obviously, their turnout tends to be most uncertain, especially when we're talking about off-year non-presidential elections, but young voters very solidly in favor of it. And then support tends to decline with age. Voters over 50 on the whole are about evenly split on the idea. Somewhat more support from women than from men, a +17 margin versus a +6 margin among male voters. When we combine these variables on the next slide, you'll see looking at
Don, can I ask a quick question on that?
Yeah, sure, Jay, go ahead.
Has it changed much on age from the last 2 times we polled?
I'd have to go back and take a look at what the exact numbers were, but the basic pattern has very much held constant. And it's true not just in Sacramento, but other places. The younger voters tend to be the ones who are most supportive.
Okay, thank you.
My impression is we might have lost, to the extent that we've lost some support, I think it is with the older voters. They're a little bit lower than they were before, but I'd have to go back and double check that, which I can do.
Thank you.
So when we break out, when we combine gender and age and when we combine party and age, you'll see some of the distinctions that emerge. Younger female voters are the strongest supporters at 65-31. Older male voters are the ones that are most challenging, 46 in favor and 51 opposed. And by party and age, you'll see that younger voters, both among Democrats and among Republicans, are significantly more supportive than their older counterparts. Younger Democrats being overwhelmingly enthusiastic, and older Republicans being the ones who are most opposed. Not a real dramatic age difference among independents, although a little more intensity of support among the younger independents. On the next slide, when we look at it by household income levels, really not dramatic differences here. We've got support from pluralities or majorities of the electorate across different income cohorts. There is more support among renters than there is among homeowners, which is often the case. Renters do tend to skew a little bit younger and a little bit more democratic, so that's part of it. But also renters often tend to be more transit dependent and more supportive of investments in transportation infrastructure. A pretty striking difference by ethnicity, as you'll see on the following slide. Very, very strong support from Latino voters in Sacramento County. 70% of them are in favor, including 44% who say they would definitely vote yes on such a measure. Looking at all voters of color together, more than 60% are in favor, 62 to 33. White voters, there's a majority in favor, but it is a much narrower one at 53 to 43. By geography, as you'll see on slide 23, the differences when we look at it broadly by supervisorial district are not dramatic. Somewhat lower support in the 4th district than we see in the other 4. And you'll see some of the differences by city highlighted as well. Obviously, the margin of error for some of the smaller cities gets a little bit high. So for example, looking at the Folsom numbers, I wouldn't put a lot of weight on the difference there. What has been pretty consistent is that support within the city of Sacramento tends to be stronger. And you'll see we've got a 58 to 37 margin there, 21-point advantage, which is the highest that we see of any of the communities within the county.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure, go ahead.
For the Rancho Cordova number, in 2019, we overcame, or we had the margin for it, so we actually passed it in our city. But you're showing that currently it's at 45. I'd be really interested to see what the polling looked like in 19 for that.
Yeah, we'll take a look. It's, as I say, smaller sample size means we've got at least the 10% margin of error there.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can compare that as well.
Yeah, but we were just over we were just over the 2/3 threshold, I know, within the incorporated area.
Yeah. We also took a look on slide 24 at how potential variations in voter turnout might impact support for the measure. We tallied up how many of the past 6 statewide elections each of our poll respondents had voted in based on their vote history on the voter file. Everyone had voted in at least 2 of the 6. That was one of the criteria we used to identify our likely voters. But even when we go all the way down to perfect voters, people who have not missed a primary or general election in the last 3 election cycles, they still favor it 52 to 44, only slightly tighter than what we see from the sample as a whole. So that indicates obviously higher turnout is somewhat better, but it really doesn't make a huge difference within the universe of voters likely to cast ballots in November 22. If turnout is significantly higher than expected, that could be beneficial, but again, probably not likely to change the overall margin of support dramatically. So what were the major factors that were driving voters to say they vote yes or no? On the next slide, you'll see the results of an open-ended question where we asked supporters of the measure to tell us the reasons why in their own words. And generally speaking, most of the comments they offered said our transportation needs improvement, transportation infrastructure in particular needs to be upgraded in the county, or we need to improve public transportation. It was a sort of expression of general principle that this is an area that merits further investment. And as you'll see on the next slide, some of the ways that survey respondents articulated that support, most of them are offering pretty general evaluations of the measure, just talking about how important transportation is, how there's clearly an unmet need. A few people are mentioning very specific kinds of improvements like fixing potholes, clearing up traffic jams, or wanting public transportation expanded in a variety of specific ways. For opponents, their objections fall into 2 major categories, which is true for almost every tax measure that we see in California cities and counties these days. Concern about taxes being too high and distrust of government to spend the money appropriately. Relatively few of the opponents were saying we don't need money for transportation, or I don't think that this set of expenditures has merit. It was just basic concern about the taxing structure and how the money would be spent. And you'll see that reflected in some of the comments on the following slide from opponents. As is often the case, some of the opponents are a little bit more strident in some of their characterizations of the measure than supporters are. And there were quite a few who were saying there should be other sources of money that should pay for this. We've raised gas taxes. There have been other ballot measures that have been passed. We shouldn't need to necessarily increase taxes further at the county level to fund these transportation needs. Now, one of the things that really did not stand out in these open-ended comments was the duration of the measure. As you'll remember, half our sample we said it'd be in place for 30 years, half we said it would be in place until ended by voters, and relatively few noticed that or called that out. In the qual board exercises, we did see more voters fixate on the potential duration of the measure. And I think the nature of the exercise, where they're staring at that language on their screen for a longer period of time, probably plays into it. We asked them in the qual boards to tell us how they would compare an open-ended measure to one that was in place for 30 years. And frankly, a lot of the respondents said, well, it actually doesn't make a huge difference because, as you'll see in the middle response on the right, 30 years is still a really, really long time. So either having it be open-ended or for 30 years means that for the foreseeable future, we're going to be paying the tax. And those for whom a sunset provision mattered tended to want to focus on a much shorter duration. But I will note, in the polling, almost no one paid attention to this or said that their yes vote or their no vote was motivated by the duration that was specified in the ballot language. So that gives you a sense of the initial support. Moving to the next slide, we then took a more detailed look at some of the individual elements that might go into the design of a measure. Starting with a list of projects that could potentially be funded if the measure were to be approved. We asked the respondents to rate each of these areas of spending as either extremely, very, somewhat, or not too important. The total that rated each is either extremely or very important, runs down the right-hand side of the slide, and that's what we've ranked it by. And you'll see the 5 items at the top of the slide are ones that at least 2/3 of voters rated as being very important. Safe routes to school, senior and disabled transit services, fixing potholes and repairing streets, reducing traffic congestion on key highways, and creating thousands of new good-paying jobs. So those are the areas of investment that respondents seem to be most enthusiastic about, and by and large, those are the same ones that they've expressed enthusiasm about in prior research, as I'll show you in just a moment. We have at least 3 and 5 that point to a number of other improvements as being very important to them, including pedestrian safety, improving bus and light rail operations, and making local freeways, highways, on-ramps, and off-ramps safer. The second tier of project priorities is shown on the following slide, and you'll see there's 3 at the top of the slide that have at least a majority rating them as very important. Including using innovative technology to try to reduce traffic, addressing climate change with low polluting vehicles, and by investing in more frequent transit. But then there's a bit of a drop off to the tier that comes below, which at most about 2 in 5 voters are rating as very important. And if you look at the dark blue bar on the left, the proportion that rate each as extremely important drops pretty sharply. It's fewer than 1 in 5 in each case. And a lot of this has to do with some very specific proposed improvements that either are affecting forms of transportation that fewer Sacramento County residents use, or are trying to improve a more narrow and focused element of the system. I would note that relatively few of these, well, actually none of them, are ones that voters dismiss out of hand as being unimportant. That orange bar, the proportion who say these investments are not too important, never gets higher than about 1/3 of those polled. But just a lot less sort of enthusiasm behind these projects relative to those that appeared higher on the list. Now, to a remarkable degree, as you'll see on the next slide, when we compare the projects tested this year that were also tested in our survey in 2019, the priorities really have not changed very much at all. All of these changes are right around the survey's margin of error or well within it. Obviously, there are some new priorities or ones that we framed in a slightly different way in this year's survey. But by and large, what voters are telling us matters to them is what they said mattered in prior research as well. And as I mentioned before, that's why I think the ballot language we shaped did end up being pretty well aligned with the things that voters described as their highest priority projects. You'll see on the following slide some of the things that the qual board participants said were reasons for prioritizing certain projects. Some of these have to do with the kinds of transportation that they use most often, their overall concern about climate change, their confidence in technology and the potential improvements that it can bring, There was a lot that the participants liked about some of the different kinds of projects that we offered up. And again, the objections that opponents offered had less to do with how the money would be used and much more to do with just general distaste for taxes and cynicism about how government might spend the money. So setting aside specific projects, we also asked a bigger picture question, which you'll see on the next slide. We asked respondents, thinking about two different visions that might guide how money from a measure would be invested, which was most important to them. Focusing on creating a 21st century transportation system that recognizes changing needs and focuses on making it easier to use other kinds of transportation other than driving, or one that focuses on immediate basic transportation needs, getting cars off the road, making roads and highways more efficient. That split voters right down the middle, with about 2 in 5 saying that they wanted that 21st century forward-looking system, and about 2 in 5 saying they wanted improvements to core elements of the system today. There were a few demographic subgroups where we saw some notable differences on this question, in particular along lines of party and ideology. More left-leaning voters tended to like that future-oriented description of the investments, whereas more conservative and sort of rightward-leaning voters tended to prefer the framing focused on more core transportation improvements. Voters in the center of the electorate about evenly split. And not a lot of dramatic differences by geography, again, when one considers the margin of error associated with some of the smaller cities. As you'll see on the next slide, when we break it up by supervisorial district, where we have a little bit more robust sample in each. The second district is one where we see a lot more enthusiasm for that future-oriented model, but the other 4 supervisorial districts all fairly evenly divided in terms of which model they would prefer. So our next step in the research was to try to understand how much some of the initial preferences voters expressed might be affected by the back and forth that they would hear over the course of a campaign leading up to a measure being on the ballot. So on the next slide, you'll see a lead into this section. 2 more slides actually ahead. We tested a range of arguments in favor of a measure and a range of arguments against it. And after each set of messaging, we asked voters to again tell us how they thought they would vote. And the positive messaging yielded 59% support to 37% opposition. So that took the initial margin of 12 points and increased it to 22 points, almost doubled the advantage of the yes side. But an opposition argument basically reduced it close to where it started, actually even a little bit tighter, 52% in favor and 44% opposed. In none of those points in the survey did we see support get within the margin of error of the 2/3 supermajority that would be required for a special tax that you might put on the ballot. This pattern, as you'll see on the next slide, is very familiar. It's remarkably similar to what we saw in the polling in 2019, where we started out with a little bit more of an advantage, drove it up to about 3 in 5 after the messaging in favor, and then after the critical messaging, it dropped down to 52%. So we are not, unfortunately, looking at a dramatically different dynamic in terms of voter support than what was evident in prior polling. Now, because we asked people 3 times over the course of the survey how they thought they would vote after getting different kinds of information, it's possible for us to segment the electorate into 3 groups, as you'll see on the following slide. A group of voters who told us they would vote yes every time we asked them. That's 47% of the electorate. A group of voters who told us they would vote no every time we asked them. That's 1/3 of voters. And then the remaining 19% who are swing voters, meaning they either were consistently undecided or moved back and forth between different positions on the measure as they got more information. What this shows is the challenge of getting 2/3 support for a measure. You've got almost half the county that's fairly locked into a yes vote, but to get to 2/3, essentially all those swing voters have to ultimately conclude that they would vote yes. And you'll see on the next slide some of the demographic subgroups within the county that are disproportionately likely to be in one or the other of these categories. No real surprises here. On the left-hand side, the base supporters of a transportation sales tax tend to be younger, tend to be Democratic, tend to be Latino. On the right-hand side, the consistent opponents tend to be Republican, conservative, male, some independents as well, and over age 50. And that leaves a group in the middle. The disproportionately swing voters tend to be in lower income and middle income households, tend to be less likely to be college educated, somewhat more likely to be more female than male, and by and large, more politically centrist. A lot of independents in there as well. Very consistent with not just past polling in Sacramento County, but polling on most tax initiatives in California. This is the segmentation we typically see. So on the next slide, what are the messages that yielded the movement that I've just outlined for you? The next slide will show you the arguments in favor of a measure that received the strongest positive response from voters in terms of the proportion rating them very convincing as reasons to vote yes. I'll show you the numbers behind these in just a moment, but the top testing messages focused on reducing traffic, the notion that our transportation problems will get worse, not better, if we fail to act in the near term, and then the desirability of investments in safe routes to school, support for transit for vulnerable populations, and the economic benefits that will come from having a strong transportation system in the county, as well as you get toward the bottom of the slide, the repairs to local streets and roads that the measure would make. These messages generally tend to align with the areas of investment that voters rated as the highest priorities, not surprisingly. On the next slide, you'll see the lower tier of arguments in favor of the measure, and none of these provoked a negative reaction or any backlash from voters, but they tended to be somewhat lower priorities in relative terms. A couple toward the top of the list include focus on promoting equity for low-income residents and communities of color, addressing climate change, which we've seen become an increasing concern for Californians, and focusing on some of the worst traffic bottlenecks in the area. So the following slide shows you the proportions of voters that rated each of these messages either a very convincing or somewhat convincing reason to vote yes on the measure. Just about every message we tested had at least 3 in 5 voters telling us it was at least somewhat convincing. We tend to focus on the dark blue bars on the left, which is the proportion that rated each message very convincing. And there, we're typically looking for messages that 40% rate as very convincing. And we didn't have any that sort of hit that high standard. Collectively, as we saw a few moments ago, they did almost double the margin of support for the measure, but there wasn't 1 or 2 that were real standouts or seemed to be more highly compelling than the others. There were some differences as we look at different geographic areas in terms of which messages were most effective. You'll see that, for example, on the next slide when we break them out by supervisorial district. But those differences are fairly minor. There's only a handful of messages here that hit 40% even in individual supervisorial districts. And the rank ordering of the messages, while it does vary modestly from district to district, is generally pretty consistent, suggesting that there's more uniformity across the county in terms of which messages are more and less appealing than there is geographic changes. When in the qual board, we went through a similar exercise, as you'll see on the next slide, and tested a range of messages in favor of the measure, you'll see some of the things that the participants really seem to gravitate to and think were better arguments in favor of the measure overall. Talking about traffic keeping them away from their families, being specific about where some of the money is going to go, helping to support vulnerable populations like the elderly, and just overall sort of the impact on quality of life that comes from having to spend more time in traffic and less time with family and friends. So that gives you a sense of the sales tax measure and where support started, how voters feel about how such a measure might be assembled, and then the impact that some of the messaging had. At the end of the survey, we also took a look, as you'll see on the next slide, at a potential ballot measure to fund the abandoned vehicle service authority. On the next slide, you'll see the language that we tested for this ballot measure. And I need to note that this wasn't a totally clean test of this concept because voters were asked to evaluate this after they were hearing a lot of back and forth around the sales tax. We gave them a core ballot description for the measure, which is pretty consistent with what other counties in California have used in the past for the approval of their measures. 51% of voters said they would vote yes. 37 said they would vote no, but you'll note that relatively few are confident in their initial positions here. Just about a quarter saying they definitely vote yes, and a similar number saying they definitely vote no. So half of voters are either uncertain or undecided. And likely this comes from the fact that most voters don't realize that they're paying this fee. Most probably have no idea what the mechanism is for dealing with abandoned vehicles. And so this is a new concept for them. I'll quickly go through some of the demographic breakouts on the next few slides. They're very similar to what we saw for the sales tax, but just reflect more uncertainty. More support from Democratic and liberal voters, but only in the mid-60s, even among those segments of the electorate. On the next slide, somewhat more support from younger voters than older voters, although there's sort of a little bit of a spike there among the 65 to 74-year-olds, but nowhere near the breadth and intensity of support among younger voters that we saw for the sales tax, which I think spoke more specifically to some things that they saw as urgent needs. On the next slide, minimal differences by income or between homeowners and renters. And finally, the geographic variations on the final slide, relatively modest. Some higher level of support in the first and second supervisorial districts, but overall, just sort of a cautious, narrow majority reaction from most voters initially. Now, we followed that up, anticipating that most voters wouldn't be familiar with this, with a more detailed explanation, which you'll see on the next slide. A simple paragraph that explained to people what the authority is, what it does to address abandoned vehicles, how it's funded, and the notion that this measure would simply continue the existing funding mechanism with no increase in taxes or fees. Just that basic paragraph of information, as you'll see on the next slide, yields a dramatic increase in support. We're up to basically 2/3 of voters saying they would vote yes, only about 1 in 4 saying that they would vote no. Seems like a fairly straightforward, low cost and beneficial program that doesn't cost voters anything extra by voting yes. And once they understand that, they're inclined to be supportive. So that takes us to our conclusions, which you'll see if you move 2 slides ahead. I won't belabor these. You've all seen a lot of the data that underlie them, but essentially the data is giving us the same picture that we've seen in prior surveys over the course of the last couple of years. Despite all of the economic and political and social change of the last 2 years, voters are in roughly the same place, with a consistent majority in favor of increasing sales taxes to fund transportation improvements, but short of 2/3, both initially and after voters get more information and hear pro and con arguments. There don't seem to be specific messages or potential structural changes to the measure that are likely to yield dramatically different patterns of support. And so that leads us to the conclusion that it really looks difficult right now to see this measure passing with 2/3 support in next year's election. On the abandoned vehicle fee, obviously much less familiar to voters. They're open to it, but given just some very basic information about how the program works, support becomes much more enthusiastic. And there we see much more potential if at least some basic level of public education can be executed for that one to be successful at the ballot. So I will stop there. I will perhaps hand it back to Sabrina. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add. Otherwise, I'm more than happy to take any questions.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dave. You went through a lot of material, but very concise in your presentation, and we thank you. I trust there's going to be any number of questions. Sabrina, before I turn to directors, anything you wanted to add to the presentation before I go to board members?
No, just thank you to Dave and to FM3 for this extensive amount of information, and I really appreciate his time. And yeah, just like to turn over to the board.
Okay, good. All right, if we can take that screen down so we can see people once again, Darrell, and thanks, Dave. Okay, so hands up. We have questions, comments. Open it to board members.
I do not see any hand raises at this time. And I also want to make note that there are no public comments in queue for item number 6.
Okay, so that's the background. I guess item 7 ties back into this, does it not? Sabrina?
Yes, that's correct. Item 7 is actually a discussion and take a vote on steps to move forward.
Okay, or talk about what we want to do. Okay, so one more time, any more questions or any questions for Dave about anything that was presented? If not, I'll move us off of item 6 onto item 7, which is is for allowing for our discussion here today then about what this body may want to entertain in going forward as it relates to a measure. So
There are still no hand raises
Okay.
by the members at this time for item number 6.
all right, Dave, you'll stand by in the event that we in discussion we get into this. So with that, we're going to move to item 7, which is then bring it back to the board for discussion regarding what may happen in 2022 or any thoughts. Again, this isn't, I mean, I don't know that it's teed up for any action today, but direction, I guess, would be appropriate if there was some consensus on the board about what we want to do, or people might want to think about this some more. We do have a little bit of time here. So, okay, I'll open up to my colleagues. Or Sabrina, anything else you wanted to?
I would just ask the board to consider either making direction to move forward or to not today, or if they would like some more time to authorize an ad hoc committee to further discuss it and bring it forward at the next board meeting.
Okay, and I see Member Harris. Just one second. So I think you just threw the idea out there. Again,
Yeah.
not unfamiliar to a number of folks that have served on the authority, that we did have subcommittees in the past that worked on either in advance of and or during discussions about measures. So that may be a thought that folks may want to lend their comments to as well. So turn to Member Harris. Jeff?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Natoli. Dave, you've dissected this information, I think, about every way you could slice it up, and it's a really good survey, a really good poll. To me, it says clearly that we would be amiss to go out and try to do a tax measure in 22. I'm not looking forward to another failure on this. There is another pathway forward through initiative. And if we could bring this to a simple majority vote, I think that we could really improve our community and our roads and our transportation. I think it's really very conclusive from the poll that our chances of success are so narrow that it wouldn't be worthwhile to move forward with that.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff. Okay, other members, thoughts, comments?
I'll speak. Yeah, I would echo what I'm hearing from Jeff. My general assumption for most tax measures that you ever look at is your campaign might swing things. I mean, a good, well-funded campaign may swing things 4 to 7 points. We're not even in the ballpark of it, and that would mean probably more money than we spent last time trying to pass this. So, I mean, if anything, our odds got worse since last year, and since the last time we attempted to do this. So, I would agree with Jeff. As much as I think there is the need to fund these projects, clearly we don't have enough voters, even within the maybes, to put us over. So unless this was a 55 or a 50% plus one, I don't see. And again, unless I wasn't on this body the last time that this was attempted. I want to say Townsend was the consultant that worked with maybe that was the Yes campaign, not the educational campaign. But in looking at the numbers, we don't have it under the current information that's in front of us.
Okay.
There is one hand raised by Member Valenzuela.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Don. Thank you, Donald. Then Katie.
Yep.
Member Valenzuela.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm happy. I concur with the comments of my colleagues that it doesn't look like a 2/3 measure. I mean, honestly, I'm looking at these numbers and say it doesn't even look like a majority vote measure has a solid shot. But so I am fine. I'm agreeing with the concurrent, with the language that we not pursue a measure from STA and making that direction clear and continuing to strategize on how we sustain our important transit funding specifically moving forward. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Katie. Others?
I do not see any other hand raises at this time.
Yeah, this is Jay. I'll weigh in if that's
Sure.
okay, Don.
Sure.
As I did participate in the last two and
Yes.
helped raise funds.
And thank you for your leadership. Yes, the last two times.
Yeah, but we failed.
Well, you're real close.
Yeah. But I totally agree with, what my colleagues have said here. There's just no point. I don't think even if somehow we chose to do it, I don't think the money's out there to back something like this, and it would require a lot of educational efforts. So I think, if we are voting today to move forward or not, and moving forward as an ad hoc, I would just make a motion that we do not move forward with this in any form at this point.
Okay.
And just be done with it.
I would second that motion.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. So,
Unfortunately, my heart says go for it. My
Yeah.
brain says not a chance.
okay, we got a motion, a second, and a third. I think that's a predictor of how the vote may go. I need to say, is there any public comment then? Anybody that was watching that wanted to weigh in before we take a vote on this, Darrell?
I do not have any public comment at this time for item number 7. And that second was from member Harris. Is that correct?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Okay.
Did you get the third?
No, I didn't catch who the third was.
Yeah, okay. All right, thanks, Jeff. All right. Okay, well, again, I think it's pretty clear, and certainly we'll take the vote in just a moment, but I appreciate the work that certainly leadership by our staff, but by our consultants, certainly by members of this board who both in the current set of discussions, but in the past have been in leadership positions and have helped guide the conversation, but also obviously direction. And I think I would concur that it's pretty clear here, crystal clear here today. So unless there's any other board member comments, we do have a motion, second and a third. I'm going to call for the roll unless there's anybody who wants to weigh in.
I do not see
Okay.
hand raises right now from the members.
All right, very good. Then that is the motion, and to not to pursue this any further at this juncture. Does that include the abandoned vehicle, or is that a separate conversation? I want to be clear about the motion.
That's a separate conversation.
Okay.
And
Correct.
I'm sorry, I have one more. I have a member that came in. Member Spees?
Yes. Okay, Kevin, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Tully. You just cleared up my question. I was curious about what happened with SAPSA. I got my answer. Thank you.
Okay, we'll come back to that in a moment then. Sabrina, is that a...
So
Yes, please.
Yeah.
SASPA is currently not on the agenda for today. We can, as the board has voted several months ago to move forward with developing some language, but we could absolutely talk about it based upon the polling.
All right, well,
We're planning on having a full presentation on that in October.
Okay,
Unfortunately, Jennifer is out of the country, so we had to table that.
All right, sounds like if board members are okay with that, this motion is understood only on the measures relate to any sales tax measure related to general transportation needs. We would come back in October with a fuller conversation about SAFSA and then how to proceed forward if that's continues to be the choice of members here in their respective bodies. So unless there's any objections, then we'll take this vote, and then we will schedule for the October agenda a fuller discussion, and then if there's any action that would be needed to provide further direction, we could take it up at that time. Is that?
Yeah, yes, and we're also still waiting on a few jurisdictions to weigh in.
Okay.
So.
Okay. All right. Very good. All right. Back to the main motion here. Then, if there's nothing further, then ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Desmond? Frost?
Aye.
Guerra?
Aye.
Harris?
Aye.
Kozlowski?
Yes.
Kennedy?
Aye.
Miller? Natoli?
Aye.
Sandhu?
Aye.
Chenier?
Aye.
Avdis?
Aye.
Singh Allen?
Aye.
Spees?
Aye.
Terry?
Aye.
Valenzuela?
Yes.
And Vang.
Yes.
And your motion carries.
Okay. All right. Well, very good. Again, thanks to all, and then we will look forward to 4 weeks from now having discussion regarding the second portion of the survey, but also the SAFSA future of that, any measure and what that may look like, and hopefully getting feedback from those jurisdictions that haven't yet weighed in, so we'll have that as a base of information. So,
And I have one hand raised from
Yes.
Member Harris.
oh sure, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, Don, just kind of a statement of remorse, really, following what Jay said. An awful lot of us have worked very hard on Measure A in various iterations, Measure B, Measure A, worked on ad hoc committees, worked really hard to try to convince the voters that this is a good thing for our region. We just missed the mark. I think a lot of it has to do with the pandemic and loss of income, loss of optimism, changes in mobility. There's still uncertainty about the future, but I just wanted to acknowledge, all of the members here who have worked very hard to try to bring this forward. And it may take a different iteration in the future. There may be an initiative movement, but the need still is there. Our roads are definitely deteriorating. Our pavement condition indexes are falling. We have many, many needs and many issues to solve in our region. So we'll keep plugging, but this was just a really inauspicious time to move forward. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you for your words too, Jeff. I think you summed it up very well. Okay, anyone else? All right, if not, then we'll move on. So we'll move on to item number 8, which is the Southeast Connector Joint Powers Authority project. It's an update, and I know that Sabrina has helped to work with Mr. Minima and in conversations with other members of the board about bringing this forward. So you want to do a little intro, and then we'll turn it over to Mr. Minima.
Absolutely, thank you. So at the June board meeting, there was a request for a project update for the Southeast Connector in regards to status update as well as its environmental mitigation. So at that request, I've been working with Derek Minima, the executive director, to develop a presentation, which he is here today to enlighten the board of the current status of the project.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Sabrina. And Mr. Minima, Derek, we'll turn to you. We have the slideshow up as well, so we'll let you proceed and after presentation, field questions and comments from authority members. So, Derek.
Great, thank you. Again, Derek Minima with Capital Southeast Connector. Appreciate the opportunity to present to you today. Wonderful to see you all. It's been a while since we've been in front of the STA board. And today's presentation is really just going to be about the mitigation component of our project. I understand there's some questions about how the initial ordinance was funding some of the mitigation requirements. So I'm just going to go through that and give you guys a brief update on some of the work that we've been doing, why it's important, and how it looks. So if you want to go to the first slide, please. So just a brief background on Measure A. One of the guiding principles of the 2004 ordinance was to preserve agricultural land. And so written in the ordinance is an allocation that totals about $15 million to open space preservation, restoration, and it's primarily focused in the Southeast County. All right, so on the screen you can see the county's general plan, large amounts of green space down in the Southeast County that is zoned for agricultural, open space uses, things like that, recreation. And so this is really the heart of District 5, a little bit of District 4, but we see a lot of the Cosumnes River watershed, a lot of agricultural operations, ranching operations. And then this is really where we're focusing a tremendous amount of our efforts into conservation and restoration. So in the Measure A ordinance passed by voters in 2004, there was 3 pots of $5 million each that were earmarked for this specific purpose. And that's in the countywide transportation mitigation fee program, the Smart Growth Incentive Program, and the local arterial program. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about why we invest in this. It's really part of our sustainable strategy, right? So the balance of developing land uses with the natural landscape is very important for the county. Rural open space it has its own unique attributes, and so protecting those ag activities is a key strategy for the long-term economic sustainability of the region, and it promotes a lot of the biodiversity of the county. And so we also see some of these regulatory requirements come through, perhaps in floodplain management and floodplain protection. So conservation and restoration is a big component of the county's general plan, as well as the sustainable strategy for the long-term future of the county. Next slide, please. So when it comes to transportation specifically, mitigation is a component of every project we do. There's some form of mitigation, and that can range from a lot of different things. We frequently think of noise abatement or stormwater quality runoff. Those are some of the types of mitigation components that go along with the traditional transportation project. We actually take it a little bit beyond those traditional elements, and we look at incorporating open space mitigation, open space preservation into our mitigation reporting plan. And so what you see on your screen is actually a picture of a wildlife crossing. And so this is along White Rock Road near the city of Folsom in the Southeast County, where we are building a wildlife crossing over Alder Creek. And so that is under construction today. And it's just one of the types of mitigation components, especially environmental mitigation components, that our project is incorporating as we build out the connector. So for us specifically, what we are engaged in is the evaluation and assessment of open space in the Southeast County. And where we do that is in the South Sacramento Habitat Conservation Plan. Next slide, please. So the South Sacramento Habitat Conservation Plan, this has been a long-term effort in the county. 5 agencies are kind of leading the creation of the conservation plan, Connector JPA being one of them. It's really a regulatory vehicle. And so the Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act are really kind of combined into this single plan. And it's administered by the South Sacramento Conservation Agency. Right? So that's a new agency, a Joint Powers Authority that was created, I believe, in 2019 for the purposes of administering this regional conservation plan. And the plan it's complete, and the permits have been issued. And so those permits have been issued to the Connector JPA. They have a 50-year timeline on them. So 404 permit, 401 permit, and the Endangered Species Act consultation is all wrapped into that conservation plan. And it's really unique. It's a great type of effort, regional conservation effort. And one of the things that I think is really important is it moves our decision-making down to the conservation agency, and it's part of that element of local decision-making, local control. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about the plan. Again, it completely overlaps with where the Connector JPA is building the connector project in the Southeast County, right? So it's incredibly, it's robust. There's about 33,000 acres that are going to be part of an integrated preserve system, and about 1,000 acres are going to be vernal pool. So 28 different plant and wildlife species. Really something that is just a fantastic long-term regional conservation effort that is underway. And so we look at aquatic resources, we look at species, we look at riparian, and this is really part of the regional long-term strategy for open space preservation and restoration in the Southeast County. Next slide, please. And so just a sample of some of the acquisitions that the Connector JPA has been a part of. We see 2 different types, right? So within the urban development area of the plan, we look for fee title. Outside of the urban development area, we look at conservation easements. And so to date, with the funding that we've received, we've had a few different purchases that have gone underway. Gill Ranch was down in Southeast County. We purchased approximately 160 acres of valley grassland. The agency is involved with the acquisition at the Van Vleck Ranch, which is a phased acquisition. And right now there's about 380 acres of valley grassland and vernal pool. And then, of course, one of our most recent ones that is on the screen is a Rooney, we call it the Rooney site, but it's immediately adjacent to Grant Line Road. near Sunrise, where we are creating about 10 acres of vernal pools. And so not only do you have the preservation, but you have the restoration, the creation element of the plan. So the Measure A money that comes in is helping to fund these acquisitions. It also helps to fund the long-term maintenance, endowment, and activities that go along with preserving the actual lands themselves. So these are just actually 3 sample acquisitions that have occurred in the last 2 or 3 years. Overall, there is hundreds and hundreds of acres along Grant Line Road that have already been secured, whether through existing conservation banks or dedications through development projects. So last slide, please. So just to summarize, back in 2004, this was a priority. It was listed in the preamble for the ordinance about the importance of preserving agricultural operations. It's part of a regional conservation strategy that the county has been working on for many years. And it's one that the Connecticut JPA is very proud to be a part of. On our website, we've got some videos that talk about some of the banks that we've been involved in. Gill Ranch being one of the ones that it was really unique because it really kind of kicked off the conservation plan in 2019. And so that concludes my presentation, Mr. Chair, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Well, thank you, Derek. Thanks for being with us today for the overview. And I trust there may be some questions from members of the Authority Board.
I have one hand raised by Member Valenzuela.
Yes, Katie.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Derek, for that overview. I appreciate you coming in, especially as a new member to SCA, getting us up to speed on what is one of the larger projects in the portfolio for this sales tax measure. So I did have a few questions just in terms of table setting for me, and then I had a specific question. But how much has been spent on this project total to date?
In terms of the mitigation or the entire project?
The entire project.
Well, it's probably around the $200 million range. There's several projects that have been constructed. We've got interchanges at 99. That's the Grant Line 99 interchange. There's a Grant Line interchange at 50, which is Silver Valley Parkway, but that is outside of Sacramento County. We've had a railroad grade separation be constructed. We have 3 projects in construction now, a total about $60 million. So we're probably in that $200 million range.
Okay, cool. And how far along would you say you are in completing the total project?
It's tough to say because it's really an outside-in strategy, right? So what we're looking at are tackling the key priority locations first, which is usually those highway interchanges. And so in terms of dollars, those are big dollar amounts, but they're not lengthy, right? So you can spend $50 to $60 million on a highway interchange, but you're not building miles of roadway. So in terms of perhaps dollars, maybe a third of the way through, or 40% or so. In terms of length of highway, I want to say maybe we've done about 10 miles or so.
Of the 35.
10 miles out of the, what's the total length again?
35.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm just taking some notes here. And then what's the budget for the remaining project?
Well, so we phased the remaining project. So we have 2 phases, right? So we have phase 1, which is traffic signals along the alignment. And that's going to probably be in the range of $300 to $350 million. If you look at what phase 2 is, that's when you start to look at grade separated interchanges at some of the major locations. For example, Highway 16 is one location where we haven't built an interchange yet. And so if you start to add in the phase 2 improvements, that could be another 100 million or so. We haven't really prepared detailed estimates for what phase 2 could look like.
Okay. So then just limiting it to phase 1, then I guess how much are you projecting will come from state or federal dollars moving forward?
I don't know that I've made that projection. We're always trying to leverage as much as possible. The contracts that we have underway right now have mostly been state and federal, right? Measure A has been leveraged significantly. So we were able to secure, I want to say, maybe 40 million out of the 60. So 2 for 1 on the Measure A component.
Okay, awesome. And then I asked you for invoices and stuff just to see like kind of what it looks like from that side. And I noticed that we are paying $40,000 a month for lobbying for your organization. So I was curious if you could talk a little bit about what that includes.
Well, we don't pay $40,000 a month for lobbying. So we do have a state and federal lobbyist, but that's probably $15,000. All right. So we have an entire public affairs team that does media outreach, runs our website, does public affairs components, all of our, call it inter-regional coordination with our member agencies. That's a big component of that contract.
Oh, interesting. Because I thought those were separate contracts, and then I was seeing a specific $40,000 a month invoice for a lobbying firm. You're saying that's not correct?
No, that's not correct.
Oh, interesting. Sorry, I'm trying to pull up the information here. I'll go ahead and pause then. Those were all of my questions for the moment, Chair, to hear if any of my other colleagues have questions.
Okay.
While I look for that invoice information.
Thanks, Katie. I just wanted to note too, Derek, because when you were in responding to the first phase, that in addition to, you said traffic signals, but it's the road improvements that would go along with that for those segments of roadway. But there's also a multi-use trail that will accompany the entire length, and that is part of the first phase. In fact, it's being constructed, at least in the segments where there are some improvements currently on the existing alignment. It may still require additional components, but I think that's an important piece of this as well. So there will be off connector adjacent to. And you might want to just take a quick moment to touch on that, because that's we've talked about that many times in the connector discussions about making sure that comes along with the project. So,
thank you. Yeah, there is a Class 1 trail that goes along the entire 34 miles. It's been at various stages of development, where we've got some stages that are under construction right now. And I mean, it's a major component of the interregional connectivity for bicycles and active transportation. So not only does that Class 1 trail parallel the connector alignment, it also connects to some of the other regional trails that are built as part of the county. So we have the Folsom South Canal, some of the connections through the Folsom Plan area, as well as the planned Laguna Creek Trail through Rancho Cordova. But that's a very good point. Thank you for bringing that up. That is part of the phase 1 component.
And just one other thing I would just add, as you talked about, again, since in the district I represent, we have much of the open space and agricultural areas that were alluded to. That one, having been certainly with some of the history of the project, that the idea is that in areas where you would have pressures for future growth, suburban and or urban growth, that we felt it was important in the conversations, both from a county general plan, but certainly the adjacent jurisdictions of Rancho Cordova, Folsom, and Elk Grove, to try to enhance the buffer as we saw things certainly moving out in the direction not only of the connector, but certainly as cities in their own growth plans, we're looking at doing those areas, and in the future of trying to secure easements and mitigation credits and so forth, or mitigation properties that would be compatible with the existing ranching and farming and or future farming and ranching operations. And we certainly worked with the agricultural community very closely as a part of that agency, the South Sacramento Habitat Conservation Agency. But we saw that as being really important, because recognizing that oftentimes, obviously, infrastructure can be, at least one of the catalysts for development. And so the idea is that recognizing we were using an existing alignment with major improvements, and I think so. I just wanted to point that out as Derek was going through the presentation. That occurred to me that was an important piece of reference going back even before 2004 in the conversations about how we might facilitate movement of people and goods along that route, but also not have it be a catalyst for growth inducement. And we've actually worked with environmental organizations over time to come to some agreements regarding that, some of the early securing of easements and as you said, fee title in a couple of cases. So
there is a hand raised by a member of Valenzuela.
Oh, sure. Katie, back to you.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I had to
Yeah.
figure out where in this invoice I saw a $40,000 contract. It was with MMS Strategies. So I guess could you talk a little bit, Derek, specifically about what their objectives are for that contract?
So we have a public affairs consultant team that provides a variety of services. One of the things that we look for in that contract is economic development studies, where we have sub-consultants under Economic Planning Systems, which is a consulting firm that does some of the development fee revenue projections and prepares benefit cost analysis. We have another component that is part of a regional economic impact study, and that is with a firm called Varshney and Associates. That's a sub-consultant to MMS Strategies. And then we also do a series of public outreach. We just had a big public meeting last week. We had a big public outreach meeting back in May. So a big part of the Connector program is constituent outreach, public outreach across 5 different agencies. And so those are the types of services, as well as the public affairs component of interfacing with our congressional delegation, which there are 3. The project crosses through Congressman Barra, Congressman McClintock, and Congressman Garamendi's district. So a lot of that goes through that contract through there, and as well as the interface with the state delegation, which we have 3 assembly members and 2 senators that we go through.
Okay, and are they doing lobbying on behalf of the Connector? Because I see in this report a lot of bill status updates and other things like that.
No, it's not. We don't actually use Measure A to lobby. So we do have a lobbyist, but that is paid through member dues.
Okay, I would love to see, because this report doesn't mention any of the subcontracting. It just looked like a report back on bills and stuff. So obviously I was getting a little concerned that there was $40,000 a month of taxpayer dollars getting used to pay for lobbying activities. So I would love to see that contract with MMS Strategies, since I'm assuming it's public, so that I could just see that, and that would be the end of my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Good. Thank you, Katie. I think Derek, you maybe provide to all members of or provide it through Sabrina. You can send it directly to Katie since you made a request, but make sure that, I think since the question's been posed, it's a reasonable question, and I think provide the information that backs up what you've just outlined in your explanation. That would be helpful.
No problem.
Okay.
And I guess I have one last question just for County Council, if that's okay, or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Because I see that it says in the measure general agency function spending when it comes to the Southeast Connector. So is there no limit to how much of the budget can be used on general agency functions?
No, there is not a specific limit to admin spending.
Okay, great, thank you.
Good, thanks. Thanks, Bill. Okay, other members of the authority, any questions? We have Derek here with us.
I do not see any hand raises at this time for item number 8.
Okay. Again, it's been a while since we had the update. Thank you, Derek, for preparing it and being responsive to the questions. And I do think periodically probably a good idea to have you come back, and maybe you can continue to work with Sabrina, and it doesn't need to be quarterly or anything, but certainly maybe annually to at least get an update. I think it'd be helpful to everybody on the board, and keeps people apprised of the ongoing work, and allows times for questions as well. And certainly anytime in between that, people can reach out to Derek or through Sabrina to seek out information that would be helpful. So, all righty. Very good.
And also for the record, there were no public comments for item number 8 as well.
Okay. All right, that was a receive and file, and again, thank you for being here, Mr. Minema. And with that, then we're going to go down to final item on the agenda, I think, which is comments from authority members. So this is your time. If you haven't already spoken up, now's the time.
I do not see any hand raises at this time from the members.
All righty.
And there are no public comments for item number 9 as well.
Okay, very good. All right, Sabrina, next meeting is?
Thursday, October 7th.
Okay, Thursday, October 7th. Again, note the change. We've kind of jumped around a little bit because of the scheduling of meetings and around other meetings. So we'll see you in about 3 weeks then,
3
right?
weeks.
Okay, very good. All right, thank you all for being with us today. Thanks again to everybody who presented, and we'll we'll see you back same time, same place, October 7th. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
We're adjourned.
You.